Welcome in, everyone, to a very exciting episode of American Joyride. I am joined today by Paul Roscoe White. He is a former Air Force jet weapons officer on the F-15 platform. He is now the second fighter jet crew member, weapons officer slash pilot, however we're going to say it here on the episode today. Paul, I cannot thank you enough for being here.
Thanks, David. Thanks for having me, man. Love the platform. Awesome.
And I want to start just like when we did with your buddy Jason, the
Yeah.
audience, we got to know, how'd you find yourself in the Air Force? Specifically, how'd you find yourself in an F-15?
Well, yeah, and to lead off that discussion, let me just say that I think as adults, especially coming out of high school, I think we all get kind of sold this bill of goods that there's a way to do things. This is the way. If you follow this way, and when I go around public speaking and talking and mentoring people, what I tell them all the time is, dudes, there's no such thing as the way. You have to pick your wave and ride it. All right. So here's my story. I'll give you the 5-minute version and then we can cut it up and splice it as we need to. But I grew up as a cotton farmer down south. My dad was a cotton farmer. I grew up out in the sticks, country boy. And when Top Gun came out, I was about 8 or 9 years old. And me and a buddy from church, we used to always either play fighter pilots or Navy SEALs. And we thought that we were going to grow up and I was going to be a Navy SEAL and he was going to be a fighter pilot and it was going to be great. Role reversal, I ended up flying fighters and he ended up joining the Marines and going through Scout Sniper School. And we reconnected a bunch of years later. It was really awesome. But sidebar, I was going to join the Air Force out of high school because I didn't really know the path to becoming a fighter pilot. I knew zero people in the military. I lived out in the sticks. There was no internet. I was very cut off. We had 3 TV channels. So it wasn't like I could go and look up, SEAL documentaries or fighter pilot documentaries or anything like that. So my mom talked me into going to college for a couple of years, failed miserably at that, and ended up enlisting in the Air Force. Told the recruiter I like to work on things. I like to work outside and I like fighter jets. So I ended up being an F-15 crew chief, did that for 8 years. And while I was doing that, got married, had some kids, finished up all my undergraduate and graduate schools, applied to OTS and got lucky and got a fighter navigator position and ended up being an F-15 Wizzo.
What did your wife say when you told her that you, instead of being on crew chief on the ground, that you now wanted to be up in the air in the plane?
Well, it was a really interesting discussion on a lot of levels, and not for maybe the reasons that you would think. She grew up. Her dad was an F-18 guy in the Marines, so she grew up around it. She knew what it was like to see her dad come home with his flight suit and all tired and sweaty and whatnot, and go on deployment. She was used to that, and so when we got married, it really wasn't that big of a culture shock. Joining the military, you don't think about it from the spouse's point of view, but a lot of times, a military member finds a civilian woman or vice versa, male, female, doesn't matter. And they marry into that military construct and they don't really know what they're getting into. Well, my wife, she had seen behind the curtain for many, many years, her entire life. She'd already moved like 15 times by the time we even got married. So I think the real shock was for both of us. I applied to be a maintenance officer when I applied to officer training school. I thought that I was too old. I was about to be 28 years old and I thought I was too old to fly. So I didn't take any of the tests to be a pilot or an aircrew member or anything. I just applied to be a maintenance officer, but the counselor that I was going through at the time that I was working with, she sent my package to a pilot board instead of a non what we call non-rated positions. They're either rated or non-rated, and she sent it to a rated board. And the guy says, "Hey, you kind of screwed this up, but guy's got a good package. We really need people right now. Ask him if he wants to fly for the rest of his career." And it was just dumb luck. And so when my commander called me and told me that I was going to go to fighter weapons training, my wife and I were just kind of like, all right, cool. It's the next horizon. Let's see what's on the other side. So it really wasn't that big of a shock, to be honest.
I love what you just said there about people don't usually think about it from the spouse's point of
Yeah.
view. The greatest line I ever heard was from a guy by the name of Bob Keller, former member of the unit. And he said, "Don't thank me for my service. I was at adult Disneyland 6 months out of the
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Thank my wife. She was the one who had to stay home, take care of the kids, cut the grass, make sure the dog's
Yeah.
at the vet." And I had never thought about it that way. And I thought that was such a great way. And you're kind of saying people don't think about it from the spouse's perspective whatsoever.
Dude, you cannot give those people enough credit. And it doesn't matter if you're a single dad or a single mom staying at home. You are a single parent for 6 to 9 months or a year, or how long the deployment cycle is. Meanwhile, when I would deploy, I don't know how other people did it, but I kind of compartmentalized things, and I would put family in a little box in my brain over here. And once a week, maybe twice a week, I would go in, I would reach out, pull out a little family, have some social interaction with them, phone call, Facebook, email, whatever it is, put the family back. But it was mission, mission, mission for us for the whole time, right? And you have to be, it has to be that way, because if you're distracted when you're doing the things that we were doing, if you're distracted, then you're not operating at peak performance. And that's what was required during those operations. You have to compartmentalize that stuff. Meanwhile, the other person is back home and they have to do everything. And you know Murphy's law, right? If it can go wrong, it will go wrong at the worst time. So yeah, the car's going to break down. The basement is going to flood. The washing machine is going to break. And my wife, before we left, one of the things that we were very diligent about, every deployment, we would make a list in a little notebook. We would have contact information for different guys around who had different skill sets. This guy's really good with cars. This guy's good at home repair. This guy's good at, whatever. If you need a babysitter, here's 3 or 4 people that you can call on at any time. And so you really have to utilize that community and that network that you have and get very comfortable just asking people for help. I know so many civilian parents around here that won't ask people for help, and they're grinding themselves down. Like, hey man, just in the parking lot next week, ask the lady next to you if she wants to carpool for a few weeks. It's really not that hard. And you find that I think that people are more than willing to help each other out. That, like, society is not as divided as some people may think, may make us think that it is. Like, people are generally good, and people generally want to help people and feel good about themselves.
I agree on that last point 100%. We can dig into that a little bit later, but you
Sure.
are correct. We are not nearly as divided as the media, the
Yeah.
politicians, whatever it might be. There's advantages to them keeping us divided. That's certainly
Certainly.
100%
For
accurate.
sure.
What is the pipeline from when you go to the training? You're like, now I'm going to do this. This is the next step, from when you're fully qualified to get in the air. You're
Yeah.
now, it's rubber stamped. It's time to go.
Yeah, so I went to OTS in the spring of '05, and I graduated there just before Memorial Day. Spent Memorial Day weekend with my family in Montgomery, and then I went to Pensacola, and we were down there for, gosh, we were down there for a year and a half. So we left there in December of '06, and it took that long to get all the way through the training. And there was a 2-month block there where I had to go to Georgia to do what they call Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals, flying T-38s down there, kind of learning the Air Force way. One thing that doesn't necessarily need to go overlooked is the first year and a half of a Wizzo's flying career was done at a Navy base with Navy instructors. And going to the Air Force way of teaching and the way of flying, it's very different. The regulations are written in a different language. The methodology is different. So that 2 months was kind of our introduction to how to walk and talk in a fighter squadron, fighter squadron etiquette, how to carry yourself as a fighter pilot and things like that. And then we went to Seymour Johnson for, I don't know, close to a year. And I ended up at Mountain Home Air Force Base, my first ops assignment in January of '08. So it was right around 2.5 years before, from the time I got commissioned and showed up at the front door of Pensacola Air Base to the time that I was starting my first operational squadron was about 2.5 years.
That is that. I mean, that's a long pipeline. That is certainly not. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
What would you say the attrition rate is from guys who start the pipeline to guys who actually make it at the end of the 2.5 years?
Oh gosh, I couldn't tell you, man. I mean, with specifics, but I can say that there's room for fallout all along the way. So, like, if you can't make it as a fighter guy, maybe you can make it as a heavy dude. It's not as task saturating. The decisions don't come as quick. It's not as fast of a pace. I mean, I don't want to sound braggadocious or anything, but to be in the fighter pilot community, you have to be cut from a certain cloth. You have to have a certain aptitude for it. You have to maybe even have a little bit of talent for it to get over that first hurdle. And some guys just aren't cut that way. And that's okay. And the Air Force, the Navy, the services out there, they're pretty good about finding those guys a spot. Keep in mind that, up to a certain point, the military has invested a lot of time and a lot of money in you, and they're not going to let that go to waste. So it's not like we just kick these people out. We're going to find a role for you somewhere to hopefully amplify your strengths and minimize your weaknesses.
Was there any point for you personally in that 2.5 years where you thought, man, maybe I'm not cut out for this like I
Nope.
thought I was? I
Nope.
love that.
Not at all. I
I
knew
love the
exactly what I
confidence.
want to do. But this is an important segment though, man. I know the types of guys that you interview, and I bet you to a T, 100% of them would say the same exact thing. Dude, you have to go into this with the attitude of there is no plan B. This is it. This is the only way that I win is by completing this. All right. And it's an attitude thing. And you can't look at it holistically and go, oh man, this is gonna be the longest 2.5 years of my life. You go, no, man, what's my next event? My next event is an instrument sortie. I have to prepare for this. I have to study for this. I have to be up to it. I have to hydrate and nurture myself on the day of so that I can execute at a high level. And when that one's over, you throw that one in the bucket and you go on to the next one. And you do that for 2.5 years. You don't look at a marathon as 26.2 miles. You look at a marathon as I got to run 1 mile 26 times. That's it.
When you're going through this type of training, I mean, how do you stop yourself from, I mean, how do you stay laser focused? Is there any routines you got to stick to? Is it just about having a schedule? This is what we're doing. All the outside noise, kind of like you're talking about when you're on deployment, is compartmentalized. How did you personally stay locked in at the highest level possible just to get through the training?
Yeah, I think it's just that focus on whatever the next evolution is. It's like I got a kid that's in college right now, and he just finished his freshman semester or his freshman year. And I've had these discussions with him. I was like, dude, you don't daydream about graduation day. You daydream about the end of the semester, right? And how do you get to the end of the semester is I got to do my homework today so that I can pass the test next week so that I get a good grade at the end of the semester. So it's kind of that mentality of break things down. In the business world, they call it chunking. You chunk things down in the smallest bite-sized little pieces, and you take those one at a time. Now, I'm not going to lie to you, and I don't think anybody would lie to you and say that they didn't think about that, getting your wings pinned on your chest or your trident or whomever you may be interviewing. Yeah, you want to sit there and you want to visualize that, and you want to live in that moment because that motivates you, and that feeling that you get when you visualize yourself walking across that stage or kicking open that door or whatever it is. That's what kind of helps motivate you, and then it brings you back to reality and go, dude, how do I get there? How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, man. And that bite happens to be tomorrow. I have to execute at a high level on this ride.
One of the things I'm without question most curious about is I don't know virtually anything about the F-15, just like I didn't really know anything about the F-16.
Yeah.
So can you explain to the audience what makes the F-16 such an incredible plane? What are the pros of it? And then maybe some things that you wouldn't ask an F-15 to do.
Okay, so you want me to give you what's good about the F-16?
I'm sorry. The
Okay.
F-15, the F-15.
Okay. But the F-16 definitely has its strengths. It also has its weaknesses. I think every platform does. One of the unique things about the F-15E is it has two people in it. And, it gets a lot of shade from the single seat fighter pilot community. It does. And I think, especially as a Wizzo, dude, I've been at a single seat fighter pilot base now for 8 years. And you don't live that long at a single seat fighter pilot base by not having thick skin. Okay, so you kind of take the ribbing, it's fine. All right. But when it comes down to it, man, when it comes down to the mission and it comes down to we're going to force package and put a bunch of jets together, each of them have a specific role. The F-15E has an advantage, I think, because of the two people in the cockpit. When you divide duties up like that, you reduce the workload on the individual, right? So one guy operating at 100% is not going to be as good as two guys operating at 80%. It's just math. And when you learn and you get two people who have done it for a while and they really learn how to time share and load share the duties that go on in the cockpit like that, it is a lethal warfighting machine. Not to mention that it carries a shit ton of gas, a shit ton of bombs and missiles and stuff. I mean, it's very capable when it comes to that. The avionics suite in the F-15 is second to none on a fourth gen fighter. I mean, it's right there with the best of them. So when you combine all of that, it is extremely capable.
When the F-15E was it designed for the sole purpose of dogfighting or striking ground targets? What was the main mission set they had in mind when they cooked this plane up?
The F-15E is the opposite of a dogfighter.
Okay.
It is terrible at dogfighting. We always joked about the one thing that the Strike Eagle does very, very well is lose energy. And when you go to emerge with an adversary, energy is king. You have to stay high on energy. He who hits the floor with the most energy is going to win the fight, right? The Strike Eagle is not going to be that guy. So our game plan was to kill you at 20 miles instead of 1 miles and not even get to that point. Obviously, that's everybody's game plan, and it's all in jest. But it was designed as a low level air interdiction platform. Really, carries a buttload of bombs, carries a buttload of missiles, carried some very unique platform specific weapons at the time, and I'm talking about the AGM-130 and the GBU-15. If some of the older guys maybe remember that. But it was basically an AGM-130 is a TV guided bomb with a AIM-7 missile strapped to the bottom of it that the Wizzo would actually fly via a data link pod, and you could launch this thing from 30 miles out or something. But it was really I think in the inception phase it was thought of as a replacement for the F-111 aardvark. So if you remember the F-111 swept wing, dual cockpit, side by side seating, not tandem seating, but two big old engines on it, and it was low level, get into the target, blow it up, and get home. A couple of unique features on the F-15E model specifically are the conformal fuel tanks, which not only give us 10 or 12,000 more pounds of gas, but they also have they have 6 weapon stations added to them. So you could carry 12 bombs just on the CFTs, and then you had the wing stations and the centerline station to carry extra stuff as well.
So it comes loaded for bear when it's coming towards the target. That's incredible. I didn't realize it could carry that much firepower. What plane did you say? Did you say the F-117?
F-111.
F-111.
The
Okay.
F-111, yeah.
Gotcha. So now you've made through the training. We got a good idea of what the F-15E is capable of. You're riding. Second seat is the weapons officer. Your first deployment to Afghanistan is 2008, yep. Correct?
That's right. Yep.
Can you lay out kind of what was going on in Afghanistan in 2008 and what your mission, kind of the background of what it was for your first one when you're going?
Yeah, I think this was still Operation Enduring Freedom. I'm not exactly sure on the timeline on that. I should have researched that beforehand, but listeners will correct me. But at any rate, we hadn't quite entered the what we called the coin fight, the counterinsurgency fight at that point, which was really kind of the next wave that came in like 2010, and that was kind of the hearts and minds, let's win them by loving them kind of thing. We were still in the warheads on foreheads stage of the fight in 2008. It was pretty hot, man. So our standard loadout, kind of back to the F-15 and its capabilities with the CFTs, our standard loadout taken off was on the left conformal fuel tank. We would have 4 GBU-12s. Those are laser guided bombs, 500-pound laser guided bombs. On the right side, we would have 3 GBU-38s, which are 500-pound GPS weapons. And then on the center line, we'd have a 2,000-pound GPS weapon on there. So, I mean, you're talking about one Strike Eagle carrying a lot of hate to the fight. By the way, for all the F-16 guys out there, that's more than what 2 of those guys can carry. So we're kind of loaded for bear when we go out.
Is your mission set to support troops that are in contact?
100%.
See, this is where I get my curiosity starts stoking. So when you wake up in the morning, it's not like they're like, we've decided we're going to bomb this building for whatever reason. This is what we're doing today. It's more, we've got troops that are calling in. They need help. We're going to go help them out.
Rarely does the former happen. It does happen. It can happen. It did happen. But that's pretty rare. So we kind of break up targets into two categories: deliberate targets or dynamic targets. Deliberate targets would be what you were talking about. Like it's been mission planned for days. Guys have gone over it. They've got the coordinates down to a millimeter. Here's your target package with all the imagery. We want you to take off, go hit this target, and come home. That does happen, and really bread and butter. That's what the Strike Eagle was designed for: was get in low, unseen, go in deep into enemy territory, hit a pre-planned target, and get out. The other side of that is dynamic targeting, and that's kind of where what we call TST, time sensitive targeting, and close air support kind of falls into that category loosely. Inside of close air support, which is what we were doing, we were supporting the ground troops to enable the ground commanders, to help him coordinate and achieve his ground scheme and maneuver. We were there as a support asset, and we were basically on call firepower for the ground troops when they got in trouble and couldn't handle it themselves.
So did they always keep planes in the air at all times so they could dispatch them, or would you be on the ground when you'd get the call, load up and go?
Yeah, so there's a little bit there's kind of two sides of that coin. We did have a ground alert for sure. We had 2 jets on alert 24 hours a day for 6 months. And we would rotate crews every 24 hours, so that piece of it did happen, and we could get those jets airborne in about 4 minutes. So it was, but think about it. We were flying out of Bagram, and to go out there for 4 minutes and to get airborne, and then depending on where the fight was, it may take you another, 10 or 15 to get there. Now you're talking like 20 minutes, dude, that firefight's over. The bad guys are dead, or the good guys are dead, or both. And so that was, I would say, suboptimal. The more optimal approach to it would be to have airborne alert. And we did that from time to time as well. We would have guys just, your task is to go up and hold in this track and drill holes in the sky. I think that the higher ups the chain, people who have probably larger brains than me, they decided that that was probably a waste of gas. So they came up with this thing called the non-kinetic effects playbook. And non-kinetic effects can be anything from, fly low over people and make noise. That way they know you're there, and maybe it'll deter bad guys from doing bad guy things. It could be a package of what we call named areas of interest, to where we can program those into our system, and we can look through our infrared targeting pod and our other sensors, and we can check them out. Maybe they've identified this as, here's a gathering place, and we just want to we don't know if they're good guys or bad guys. We just want to keep tabs on it from time to time and make sure nothing nefarious is going on. So they started tasking us more with that, and you're kind of getting 2 for 1. The bang for your buck goes up by 100%. So you're making noise, deterring bad guys. You're checking out potential hot spots, maybe finding bad guys doing bad guy things, and you're already airborne. So your response time to good guys being in contact goes down tremendously.
That's fascinating. I had
Yeah.
no idea that's how stuff like that works. If you get the call for troops in contact, let's say whatever it might be for whatever reason, how are you communicating? Are you just over a radio to the guys on the ground? How are you communicating? These are the good guys. These are the bad guys. This is where we're going to strike.
Yeah, usually it's just, think of a quick scenario. So if I'm out there doing one of those non-kinetic sorties, and I'm flying up and down the highway looking at guys shaking rugs on the side of the highway or whatever. By the way, sidebar, we did create a little bingo card to catch, like a guy dragging a donkey cart, a guy shaking a rug, a dude taking a piss on the side of the road, and every now and then you'd hit bingo in one night, and it was kind of cool. Anyways, you have to find ways to entertain yourself when you're drilling holes in the sky for 4 hours at a time, right? So we're up there, we're drilling holes, we're looking at guys taking a piss on the side of the road in our targeting pod, and then the radio cracks and it says, "Hey, dude 01, you are for tick, Bravo 02 at this coordinate at this bullseye. Contact JTAC creature 01 on 3030 Fox Mike." And you go, okay, and you snap towards that coordinate, towards that heading. And when you're within about 50 miles, you start trying to get him on the radio. And from there, it's really a game. It's kind of a dance in a way, where you have to be moving together a little bit. You can't be stepping on each other's toes. One guy has to lead, obviously, but you have to be in step. And you have to, between the JTAC and you in the air, you have to build this common operating picture of what's going on, right? So he's trying to feed us information, give us, meanwhile, I mean, think about it. We're still 40 miles away. So we don't even have eyes on the battle space yet. We don't know what he's talking about when he says the building, the L-shaped building. We haven't seen it yet. So we're trying to build this mental model of what's going on. And hopefully when we do get our sensors on, maybe 15 miles away or so, maybe we can start to correlate that and it makes sense.
You just said JTAC. I hear pilots, both
Mm-hmm.
helicopters and the jets, planes. They talk about JTACs and
Yeah.
CCTs.
Yeah.
What can you are those are not the same thing, but they are very
They are not.
similar. But they're
The,
similar, aren't they?
well, yes and no. It gets a little muddy, but CCT would be more on, I would put that more into the special operations category, into the tiered structure, if you will. Um, they go through a different pipeline, they go through different training, and their role is more of a pathfinder role. Like they're gonna be the guys to go up and set up a landing zone or an airstrip in an austere environment from scratch, and be the guys controlling airplanes coming into that. Whereas a joint terminal air controller, the JTACs, I would say that they're more on the conventional side versus the special side. They're aligned more towards um, they're aligned on the conventional side with Army brigades, right? So at the brigade level, you're going to have a air liaison officer, which I did twice. It was pretty cool. We'll get into that later. And then you have a JTAC and a JTAC in training. That makes up what we call the TACPs, the Tactical Air Control Party. So there's your party. And when we deployed, we would deploy, and I'm talking about from the Army side, from the ground side, because I did this twice. You'll deploy with an ALO, probably another ALO, a junior ALO, air liaison officers, and then you'll have a handful of JTACs and a handful of JTACs in training, like number twos, and then you'll deploy those over the battle space down all the way down to the company and platoon levels. So the JTAC, his job when we're in country, his job is controlling the airspace over the ground space for the ground commander, right? So if you got a battalion or a company that's going out there and say, we're going to go take the hill, all right, great, let's go take the hill. Well, he's going to have a JTAC with him, and he's probably going to be sitting right beside that captain, and they're going to roll out in their Humvees or their whatever truck they're riding in, and that JTAC is going to control probably a 10 to 15 mile cylinder around that hill that we're going to go take. We call that a restricted operating zone, a ROZ, and it's going to have dimensions and it's going to have rules to entering and exiting and whatnots. But any aircraft that comes into that JTAC is responsible for deconflicting them to make sure they don't crash into each other, giving them assignments. When it gets time to what we say go kinetic or drop bombs on it, that JTAC is the one that's assigning the targets to the aircraft and reading them off the coordinates and all that stuff. So his role is very dynamic.
Gotcha. Okay, that's good to clear because I've
Yeah.
never understood quite the difference. To me, it always seemed like they were used a little
Yeah.
interchangeably, and I'm glad that we were able to kind of get that
Yeah. Now I hesitate to put that in black and white, and because I know that there's listeners going, no, no, okay. So there are a lot of your special operators are JTACs as well. I was on a Navy SEALs podcast not too long ago, and he was a JTAC. He was a Navy SEAL, but he was a JTAC. He had gone through the JTAC school. There are CCT members that are JTACs. So let's just try not to confuse those. There are special operators who are JTACs, and then there are JTACs in the conventional Air Force and Army as well.
Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yep.
Are there any moments when you sit back and you look at your multiple deployments to Afghanistan, flying in this incredible weapons platform, that you always find yourself missions that you always find yourself coming back to?
I have some really good memories, man. And I use the term good kind of loosely. I have vivid memories, both on the ground and in the air. My first bomb that I dropped was in the Korengal Valley, which was in 2008. Man, it was hot up there. A friend of mine named William Yeski, he actually just wrote a book called Damn the Valley. And it was all his 4 months there in the Korengal Valley, just getting their asses shot off every day. So yeah, it was very kinetic. We would send out 2 Strike Eagles with that loadout that I told you earlier, and they would come back with nothing. Like we were cleaning house up there. So those were very memorable. it was always really neat to me. It was really surreal, I think, when you be in the chow hall and guys would come in, some Army guys would come in and their uniforms are all dirty and they got, you can just tell that they've been out in the field for a long time. And we're all going to the big chow hall at Bagram, and we start talking and they're like, "Hey man, were you up in Korengal like 5 days ago?" "Yeah, dude." "Did you drop a bomb on such and such?" "Yeah, man." He goes, "Dude, that was my platoon, and thanks, dude, you saved our ass." And so that was, to get that little bit of feedback for us, that was always very welcome and very unique, I thought.
Without a doubt. I mean, I can't imagine how cool that would be to have someone come up to you and you know that you made an impact. Let's talk
Yeah.
about that. What you just said, the first time you ever dropped a bomb.
Hmm.
Were you on one of those kind of routines where you're checking things out and then you just get the call, or were you on the ground and you got sent up?
Yeah, no, we were in the air already. So aside from that non-kinetic playbook that I was talking about, we would, I mean, every day we would get assigned to specific areas of operation to talk to a specific person because he had requested us to come check out some things. So it wasn't just always us up there, drilling holes in the sky. A lot of times we actually had taskings and we would go talk to a JTAC and we would be assigned to him for an hour to 2 hours. Then maybe we go hit the tanker and go to another guy or whatever. And we were on that day, we were actually doing that. We were down around Jalalabad, kind of over in the northeastern part of Afghanistan, very mountainous, very rugged, very beautiful, actually. And we were just checking out some stuff, just flying around. The JTAC had asked us to check out a couple of things, so we were rooting around over there, and we got called to a troops in contact over by Korengal. And so we beat feet over there real quick, and I think it was probably within 5 minutes we were hitting the button.
And
It happened pretty fast.
and what were you bombing specifically? Were Taliban fighters, had they amassed on a position? What was
Yeah.
unfolding on the ground that they called you in for?
Yeah, good guys were pinned down at their base, and bad guys were trying to come out of the hills on them. And it was one of those situations where good guys are taking fire from bad guys, and we didn't know exactly where they were. We knew a general area, and so the guy gave us kind of a generic grid. Hey, they're shooting at us from over there. And we made a line of deconfliction, and as long as our bombs were on the right hand side of that line, then we were good. If they were on the left hand side, that was bad. And we kind of did some high priced landscaping over there, but they stopped shooting at the good guys, and that was the point. So
I am so curious. I often ask guys who, whether it be Black Hawk Down or something else, they all remember the first time they pulled the
yeah.
trigger. They all remember kind of what they were thinking,
Oh,
or
I could
maybe.
probably draw it on a piece of paper right now.
Well, that's what I'm going to
Yeah.
ask is, you've gone through all this training. Now, finally, what
Yep.
you've been trained to do, when you hit that button and that bomb detached from that plane, what was going through your mind?
I had this discussion. We I had this discussion with a guy a while back, and he was a tier one guy, and we were discussing the differences between the tier one dudes who are kicking down doors and getting face to face with bad guys, versus us flying around in the air. I mean, we're flying at, let's say we're flying at 20,000 feet. Dude, that's over 3 miles away, straight up, and we might even have a 5 or 7 mile offset to that. So it's not like we're up there where we can smell the guys. We're not that close to the fight. So to have that visceral reaction to targeting another human, I don't know that it really resonated as much with us as maybe it did with the guys on the ground. Now that said, when that call comes in, that's where I was, when I was talking about earlier, we were talking about the wives back home and having to compartmentalize things. Dude, you have to be able to go from 0 to 100 in a split second. I mean, because that's what happens. We're over there, fat, dumb, and happy, drinking our energy drinks and eating our granola bars, looking at, a donkey on the side of the road. And then all of a sudden, hey, you got to go over here 30 miles because your bros are getting shot up. And within 5 minutes, you're dropping a 2,000-pound airburst weapon on a bunch of bad guys. That's how fast it happens, man. And if you're not ready to flip that switch at a moment's notice, then you probably don't deserve to be there.
Well said. I could not agree more. Is it almost, when the movies, if you watch like Top Gun or whatever movie it might be, when they always show like an airstrike, you hear someone come up over the radio as soon as the bombs hit, and they're like,
Yeah.
good hit, or you missed them. Is that essentially what happens in real life? Like when you drop within, 20 seconds, someone gets on the radio and says you hit them, or you got to come back and do it again?
To a degree. I mean, it depends on what the target is. If it's a building, I can tell you when the bomb impacts. I can tell you if I hit the building or not. I can't tell you if I destroyed it or met the desired weapons effects necessarily. I would have to send somebody out or get some further data. If your intent was me to turn that building into a pile of rubble, I can't necessarily tell you that within 20 seconds because there's dust, there's IR blooming in our targeting pods. There's a number of factors, but after a few minutes, we could probably look at it and go, yeah, dude, it's a pile of rubble. Um, if you're asking me to drop a bomb on the side of the hillside so the bad guys stop shooting at you, well, did they stop shooting? Yes or no? I mean, that's fairly immediate. You'll know that within 10 seconds.
What I mean, I'm curious because when you talk about like rules of engagement on the ground, it's like, okay, we're getting shot at, we got to shoot back.
Yeah.
If you're flying a fighter jet over like Baghdad, I know Jason was like, they didn't want us dropping bombs in certain areas, obviously,
Yeah.
because it's a civilian. But when you're in Afghanistan, it's kind of this more mountainous range. When you get a call, is it up to your discretion in the cockpit, like when we're going to do this, when we're going to drop these bombs? Or is there someone that you have to wait for on the ground? Once troops are in contact, you're not just
Yeah.
flying around. Once troops are in contact, whose call is it when we're going to drop the bombs or not?
Well, that brings up a really good discussion point. Now, I will say that this is, what are we 16 years later, so the rules are constantly changing, and it depends on what the strategic objective is of the fight. And like I alluded to earlier, just a couple of years after I was there in 2008, when I went back in the spring of 11, the rules had completely changed and we weren't there to blow things up anymore. We were there to win the hearts and minds of the people. So I'll say that with a grain of salt. Now, at the time, it was fairly liberal, I would say, especially out in the rural parts. And when you have troops in contact, that changes things drastically, right? Because all of a sudden, that building that you thought was full of goat herders and nuns is now full of bad guys that are shooting AKs at you, and that changes the ROE immediately. Who has the final vote? I think it ultimately it comes down to the people in the cockpit because we have our finger on the button. So we have the final say, and once we push that button, all bets are off, right? Now up to that point, we can have a discussion with the ground commander and the JTAC of, does this meet the ROE? Are those in fact bad guys, or are they goat herders and nuns? Whatever the case may be, we can definitely hash that out. When troops are in contact, that discussion has to be very short, and that goes back to, dude, you have to be on your game, man. You have to know these things. You have to. I think Jason said it, and I've said it 1,000 times. When you go into a fight at 500 miles an hour and you don't have a reverse option, you have to know that you have your shit together. And you have to have all that stuff memorized so that you can flip through it like a Rolodex in your brain in 0.69 seconds and find the answer to it, so that you don't have a 4-minute conversation while your bros are getting shot up on the ground.
You just said that you were there in spring of 2011. Were you in
Yeah.
Afghanistan when they got bin Laden?
Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to hear about this. So
It was, yeah, go ahead.
what was it like being in country in Afghanistan, and how did the news come? I mean, did you hear about it before the president announced it, or did you find out when everyone else found out?
I definitely heard it before the president announced it because we didn't have TV over there. So I heard it over. We had. I was on a ground deployment on that one. I was an air liaison officer, and I was down south. I was just west of Kandahar, so very, very, very far away from where the actual operation went down. But I was sitting in the talk that night in the Tactical Operations Center, and we have across the battle space, across the entire Afghanistan battle space, we have chat rooms. It's basically how the war was run for a lot of years, was over chat rooms, over a very secure network. And I saw it first over the chat room. It just came up and said, we just got bin Laden. And I don't know, maybe 20, 30 minutes later, the brigade commander walked in the talk and said, hey, boys, we just got number one. And he turned around and walked back out. It was very benign. It was like, okay, great. What are we doing now?
That's incredible. I mean,
Yeah,
and I like how casual you just say it's very benign.
it
I
was. Yeah,
To tell you how world apart people can be, I
yeah.
was a freshman in college when Osama bin Laden was killed, and it was the Sunday going into finals week. So finals started that Monday morning, and
Yeah.
they canceled some of them, and it was a party unlike anything you'd ever seen. And the only thing I'll say about that was the next morning when kids were getting picked up from school by their parents, one of the girls, her dad was a New York City firefighter. And from the news breaking Sunday night to him picking up his daughter, he had plastered stuff over his car. He had like a Jeep. And it was awesome. It was all about like God. I mean, it was the coolest thing in the world. And
Yeah.
when you said you were there at spring in 2011, I had to ask that's simply incredible to hear it from someone who was in Afghanistan when it all went down, obviously.
Okay, so let me ask you this. That happened in the spring of 11, and we didn't pull troops out of Afghanistan until a couple of years ago. So 11 years went by before that happened. Do you think that party was worth it and warranted?
Well, what I would say to this is two things. I don't think anyone was celebrating the war in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
You got to remember the way. So I'm 32. I don't have any issue saying my age on not for people my age, and I can only speak for myself. 9/11. Well, I can speak for me and my friends who say the same thing. 9/11 is, I truly believe this, a culturally defining, like molding of clay event.
Yeah.
I was in fourth grade when 9/11 happened. So all I saw on the news growing up as a kid was 9/11, Afghan war, Iraq war,
Yeah.
suicide bombings in the insurgency. I mean, that's all it's all we talked about in school. It's
Yeah.
all that was on the news. So yeah, I mean, because for me, like I'd been hearing about this guy for the last 10 years, and a kid from where I came from, the town over, who was a lifeguard, got shot in the back of the head in Afghanistan.
Hmm.
So I'm not going to pretend like I had any personal connection to Afghanistan whatsoever,
Yeah.
but it was from the area. So I don't think anyone was celebrating the end of the war in Afghanistan. I think people were saying that like this boogeyman, if you will, for lack of a better term,
Yeah.
that we've seen on the news for the last 10 years, he's finally dead. Um, so that's how I would look at it. What would you say?
Yeah. Well, and I didn't mean that to slight in any way. I think it's unique to get the two different perspectives. One from a guy who's not necessarily military affiliated and a little bit younger, generationally. You said that you were 4 years old. I was at Elmendorf Air Force
No,
Base.
I was in fourth
Oh,
grade.
sorry, fourth grade. I was at Elmendorf Air Force Base as a crew chief on F-15s, and when the towers went down, I was called back into work, and we generated 12 airplanes with missiles and weapons ready to go secure the skies. So from that moment forward, yeah, we were locked into this conflict over there. But I think by the time that had happened, uh, I don't want to say we had lost that sense of it. We just understood at the time there was a completely different fight going on. Like the fact that we got him didn't really matter to us because, like I said, I mean, even our commander came in and goes, "Hey, dude, we just got number one," and he turned around and walked out because we still had operations going on that day. That wasn't our fight. Our fight wasn't up in Pakistan trying to capture this old dude with a beard who had been out of the game for who knows how long. We were there to do this very specific thing, and we had guys getting their limbs blown off by IEDs down in our AO that ended up going on for another 10 or 11 years down there. So the fact that we got the number one dude that was on the number one list, it really didn't affect us at all. That was my only point.
No, and I didn't take offense to it, not
Yeah.
one bit. I love that type of back and forth. When you talk about getting called in back to work, because one of the things that, again, not to age myself, but I was only fourth grade at the time. I'm only 32 now. Everyone talks about like why weren't there fighter jets in the air quicker? And I don't know why. I'm not an expert. But the big one is Flight 93 goes down. Those two
Yeah.
fighter jets that find it take off from Andrews Air Force Base, which is down the road from where I currently live.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through? Because, like you said, you're on the ground at this point. What was the chaos like of 9/11 when you get called back into work and you're putting weapons on planes and things like that?
I think it was just a little bit of it was a kind of a little bit of yeah. I mean, I'm an enlisted troop, and I'm going to do what I'm told by my superiors because that's what we do, right? They said go out there and put missiles on this plane, and we're going to do that. The question was why, and that took a few days to kind of flush itself out. I mean, there was a lot of if you remember, maybe you don't because you were young, but there was a lot of confusion at the time. And, I'm in Alaska. The towers are going down at what, 9 o'clock, I think, um, somewhere around 9 or 9:30 in the morning, Eastern time.
Mhm.
Well, dude, we're on Alaskan time. We're 4 hours behind you. So it's 5 o'clock in the morning, but I'm sleeping when this call comes in. And I'm like, what the heck, man? And even that was probably 30 minutes to an hour after the actual events took place when we had to go back to work. And so we've kind of got this big question mark over our nuggets going, why are we doing this? We didn't understand that they were shutting down the skies, that they were grounding all the airplanes. We didn't know that. We were just told to go put missiles on. I'm sure that the pilots had a different briefing than we did. And, that was kind of goes into, what's your role in the team? If your role is to go get coffee, then be the best coffee getter in the world. Don't ask questions. If your role is to jump in the cockpit and go shoot down a Cessna, then do that better than anybody else on the planet. So that's kind of where I fell into that.
That that why do you think when it came to the planes, looking back now, experience as a ground guy, experience as a weapons officer, do you think the U.S. just had grown to believe something like that wasn't going to happen? Why do you think that there was so much confusion to get fighters in the air? I mean, George W. Bush in his National Geographic interview, 10 years after 9
Yeah.
11, said they couldn't even find fighter jets for Air Force One right away. Like they didn't know where they were going to come from. Why do you think
Yeah.
there was not they weren't as quick as you might imagine?
Dude, the short answer is I don't know. Probably it was probably a cross between just a lot of confusion and shock and surprise. I mean, who hasn't been in a situation where, something that you didn't plan on happens to you and you're kind of frozen, like your fight or flight mechanism hasn't kicked in yet, and you've got that half second there where you don't know really what is even going on. And I imagine there was some of that, and you can kind of see that when you go back and you watch the video of Bush getting the briefing in his ear while he's sitting there reading the books to the kids, right? You can kind of see that on his face. He's sitting there kind of going, what? He's got this big question mark over his head. Like, what? I don't even know how to process this right now. I think it just caught us all off guard, man. And to be honest with you, I don't know why there wasn't a response or the response was lagging or any of that. I can tell you that where I was in Alaska at Elmendorf Air Force Base, we had jets in the air within just a few minutes to usher down. Anchorage International Airport it's a hub for people coming from Asia to North America. It's a stopover for gas because I don't want to get into a bunch of junk here, but great circle steering, it's shorter path to go north than it is to go straight across the equator, blah blah blah. So they'll fly up to Anchorage, stop and get gas, and then fly down to the States or wherever they're going. So there's a lot of international travel headed towards Anchorage. And those jets were required to go up and either turn them back around or escort them down to the ground or whatever it may be. And we only had 4 jets sitting alert at the time up there, which is why I got called in to go generate another 12 because the workload was just more than those 4 jets could handle.
If something like that happened again today, in your assessment, would the response be way more rapid?
I would like to think so. I'd like to think that we learned lessons from that and we applied those lessons in some way. We had Operation Noble Eagle that went on for a really long time. I'm not sure if it's still going on now or not, but basically it amounted to at all times there were a certain amount of fighter jets that were airborne around kind of the major points on the East Coast and West Coast. Maybe New York City or Washington D.C. or I knew some guys who flew around Florida. Some of the like when the space shuttle was launching or something, there'd be Operation Noble Eagle would be around there, and so maybe that airborne response was a reaction to that. I'm not sure if that's still going on or if we have some other capabilities that are out there that I'm not privy to. But I would like to think that here we are 23 years later. I'd like to think that we learned some lessons from that, and we are ready to apply them the next time.
I hope you're I hope you're
Yeah.
100% correct. Kind of the last thing on the Afghanistan, to get real back to the Afghanistan thing real quick. Well, 2 things. What were there any unique challenges to flying in Afghanistan compared to Iraq, where it's flat, it's mostly a desert? Afghanistan obviously has a lot of mountains,
Yeah.
or are you so high up in the air that it's completely irrelevant
Oh
to a
no,
fighter jet?
there were definitely challenges. Each area of operations presented its unique challenge. I think that Iraq probably had more urban areas than Afghanistan did, and I use that term urban kind of loosely, but big cities. Baghdad's a big city. Tikrit's a big city. Some of these places are big, whereas Afghanistan really you only had a couple, and most of it was rural and mud huts, and you might have a large gathering of people, but it really wasn't, you're not targeting through alleys of high-rise buildings or anything like that. The mountains created some challenge for sure. In fact, there was one sortie that we were flying, me and another guy, and it was one of those boring night sorties where not a lot's going on. Everybody's sleeping. It was cold. It was maybe like November, December time frame. So in October ish, the Taliban kind of went to bed for the winter, and they woke back up around March or April time frame. So there really wasn't a lot going on. And so we're bored out of our tree at like 2 o'clock in the morning. And we spent a good 3 or 4 hours trying to figure out what we would do if we had to punch out over the mountains up there that are snow covered in the wintertime. And the mountains are, have you ever been to the Grand Tetons, like up in that area, the Northern Rockies or anything? The
Uh,
mountains, go
I
ahead.
don't. Well, I've been through like Idaho, Wyoming, and
Yeah,
Montana, but
okay. The
I don't know.
Bitterroots.
Yeah, I don't know if
Yeah,
I've specifically been in that spot
the
though.
the Bitterroot Mountains are a good example. Like these mountains are there, it's jagged. It's very rugged up there. Big, deep canyons, big, deep rivers. It's really beautiful during the summertime, even I guess during the winter. But if you had to punch out on top of one of those or over one of those mountains that are reaching, close to 20,000 feet high, what are you going to do, man? Because, I mean, we were wearing flight suits with jackets and gloves, and that was about it. So you're probably going to freeze to death. So the best we could come up with was inflate your one man raft and enjoy the ride down because you're probably going to die either way. But
Well, when you talk about punching out, do you have like some kind of transponder on, like on your person that they would be able to use to locate you, like a rescue team? How would they find you?
yeah, the seat does. The seat has a locator beacon on it, and then in our survival kits we have a radio.
And what do you must have a pistol, I assume, as well.
Yeah, yeah, we always flew with a pistol. We had Beretta 9 millimeters. That, I mean, doesn't do you a lot of good when you jump out on top of a mountain, but if you
Right.
jumped out on top of a bunch of bad guys, you could at least shoot 8 of them.
Uh, um, do you,
Shoot
when
at 8 of them, I should say.
shoot at 8 of them? Is there like a protocol for if you got to eject? Is the idea if you can stay with the seat because that's where the beacon is, or is it once you're out of the plane, you
Now,
do whatever you think you got to do to get somewhere?
well, I mean, the survival piece of it is going to be unique to that situation, and no two are going to be the same. So you have to take into account all of the factors. Where are you? Are you in a hostile place? Are you freezing cold? Do you want to get warm? Are you in a really hot place? Do you want to get cool and wet? Whatever it may be. So you have to take all that into account. So probably the one I don't know, the one constant in all of that is probably don't sit still. You gather up your stuff, get to a suitable rescue location, because you have to think like when you're in an austere environment like that, somewhere that's untouched by roads and people, the only way you're getting out of there is either a rescue team that hikes up to you or a helicopter if they can get up that high. So you have to create an advantageous position. You have to participate in your own self rescue, I guess. Like Tony Robbins says. So you have to do things that are going to make it more advantageous to you and the team that are coming out there to get you home. Um, when you separate from the seat, there's a lot of nuance that goes into this based on altitude and when the seat's actually going to separate and go its separate way. And now you're just falling in your chute with your little survival kit dangling below you. But the beacon is in that, and so the beacon's going to be with you to a point, um, at least until you land, and maybe you ditch that kit in favor of something that's gonna help you enable rescue or whatever the case may be. there's the standard answer is it depends.
No, I'm fascinated by that. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
even imagine. I cannot imagine what would happen if I was ever in a situation like that whatsoever.
Yeah.
Kind of closing the loop on the Afghanistan stuff. You just made a mention how the war went on for years after bin Laden was killed.
Yeah.
I mean, it went on more than a decade. We pulled out, what was that, 2021 was when it was all said, August
Yeah. I
2021.
guess it was 21 or 22. I don't remember.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
can't remember either. When you saw all of the events that happened, the collapse, the pullout, the evacuation, you were a guy who was over there many times.
Yeah.
You dedicated a huge chunk of your life. What were you feeling? What were you thinking? Did you think, I've interviewed some guys and they said they didn't care one bit. They're like, I did what I was asked to do. It's not my
Yeah.
problem. I don't care. Other people, they were very angry about it. They felt like it was all for nothing. A lot of people in between. For you, what was it like when all that came to an end?
Well, I definitely have a lot of opinions on it. And I'll just throw that out there at the top is these are my opinions. They do not reflect the opinions or methodologies or ideas of anyone else, to include, my employers or the DOD or anybody. This is just my opinion, but I think it should have happened 10 years earlier, to be honest with you, because I think as early as probably 11, 12, 13, we knew that fight was over. We knew that it wasn't going anywhere. And the fact that we killed Osama bin Laden didn't really matter in the grand scheme, because I think we knew that we weren't achieving what we thought we were going to be able to achieve. We went over there with a little bit of American arrogance and it didn't work. And I think that we knew that probably as early as 2010, 11, 12 timeframe. And we should have got out then. But then it becomes into like this political push pull. And I mean, we can go down so many rabbit holes, and you want to talk about the military industrial complex, or you want to talk about the politics of it all, and the reasons that we were there for another 10 years. But honestly, I think we should have got out a lot earlier. When we did finally get out, I think that was probably a botched operation. It was done for optics instead of strategy. And I think that it could have been done a lot better.
What was they gave the name of the airbase they initially gave up before they did the evacuation from I don't know if you'd say commercial, but the main one. What was the Bagram? That was the one they gave up, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If the United States had held on to Bagram Air Base during the evacuation and still had access to it, would that have made any difference whatsoever?
I'm not sure, man, because I don't know what assets they still had at Bagram. When I was there from September 12 to May of 13 on another rotation, and our job during that was we were drawing down, man. We were pulling back assets from all of our outlying areas in our area of operations. We had connexes full of gear we were sending back home. I mean, we were really drawing down, and we thought that everything was kind of coming to a close. This was in 2012. We thought that things were kind of wrapping up back then. I ended up sending a bunch of guys home from that deployment because we just didn't need them anymore. That's how little work we were actually doing over there. And the task became pack everything up and go home. So that the idea that we were there for another 10 years after that really kind of caught a lot of people by surprise, myself included. So to get back to your question, I'm not sure what was left at Bagram. I hadn't been there in almost 10 years, so I didn't know. Did we still have air assets there? Did we still have a bunch of ground assets? I mean, Bagram was kind of the northern hub. You sort of had Kandahar in the south and Bagram in the north that were the big hubs for everything. Air, ground commanders. I mean, all of your black assets and your tiered assets were all stationed out of one of those two bases. And so I'm not sure what was left, to be honest with you, and how that could have affected that fight.
When you talk about how the war was essentially, stagnant, not winnable by 11, 12, 13, whatever it might be. And I think there's a lot of very smart people who absolutely hold that exact same assessment. Is there anything that you think could have been done differently, maybe even years before, where we don't find ourselves in a 20 plus year, I don't want to say quagmire, but You know what I'm
No,
getting at.
that's exactly what it was, man. And the reasons that we were there, we can debate that all day. Um, to answer your question, yeah, undoubtedly there's things that we could do different, but that's the nature of doing business, right? I mean, you always debrief things and find out what you could do better or do differently. The question is would we do things different? And given the same circumstances a second time, would we apply the lessons that we learned through that first 7, 8, 10 years of being over there? Would we apply those to the next iteration? And I can't answer that until we get there, because you have to think back, man. Like, I don't know if you remember, you were a little bit younger, but those first 5 to 8 years that we were in country over there, we had a specific mission that we were going after. After that, that mission changed, and it never really went back to that. And that first mission was eliminate bad guys.
Right.
And when we changed that mission to win the hearts and minds and change Afghanistan into this free society, that created a whole new set of problems. And that's kind of how we perpetrated this thing for so many more years. So when you say we lost the war, that's, I don't know if I would use those terms. Well, I don't know if I would use the word war to begin with, because the war was actually over, years before we decided to pull out of it. We changed the mission over there, and that dictated how we operated and why we stayed there for so damn long.
Yeah, and allow me to clarify that real quick. I don't think that we lost combat operations. I think that when the United States decides it's going to kill bad
Yeah,
people, it's very good at that.
we did. We killed a lot of bad people.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Where I think the United States undoubtedly failed is this idea that a tribal driven country was going to turn into some liberal democracy when the people there had no concept of what that was,
No.
and or there was no proof that that was ever going to work. I mean, feel free to disagree if you think it could have worked, but
No.
yeah, no, to me,
100% agree with you, man. And in 2008, when I was over there in 2008, we were having these conversations on our back porch going, dudes, this is not going to work. Like, anybody can see this, right? Like, one village on this side, on the right-hand side of a mountain, didn't even know that the village on the left-hand side of the mountain existed. That's how compartmentalized they are over there. And it's not throwing shade on them. And I keep saying them and they, and it almost sounds derogatory, but it's not. They are a rural farming, like, they only care about themselves and their goats and their little village, and that's it, man. They don't give a shit what's going on in Kabul, because it doesn't affect them. All right. I want to raise my family. I want the best pigs and chickens I can have, and I want to die honorably. That's really about what it came down to for them.
When you talk about the military industrial complex, I'm very curious to get your thoughts on that even further. One thing I will say, I interviewed some guys that were in Tora Bora when they almost got bin Laden, essentially right when the war started. And those guys they've said it on the record, they requested permission to go into Pakistan and cut him off from the back end and kill him and end it, because they were doing all this bombing and they had him on the radio and they knew his back was against the wall. And that was denied. They were not allowed to go. And then bin Laden wasn't seen again until they found him in Abbottabad. You talk to those guys, they're awfully suspicious about why they requested permission to seal off the whole area after their little 2-hour ceasefire, and they were denied doing that. They have a lot of thoughts on that. I find that very curious too. I don't have a good answer. When you think of either political incompetence or poor leadership or the military industrial complex, it seems like you have some thoughts about that stuff. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, I do, man. And that example specifically it's a good way to highlight a few things. Because I think really what it comes down to is you've got guys who are, a world away, sitting in an office making decisions for guys on the ground who have all of the battlefield situational awareness. And they're like, guys, if you really want this war over with, it can be over in 10 minutes. Let me do this. And then we all pack up and go home, and it's over. And then you got a bunch of guys sitting around in a mahogany room, smoking cigars and drinking scotch, going, well, you know what? If we did that, then we wouldn't make this $1 billion on this new thing that we're developing or whatever it is. So, obviously I'm talking a little conspiracy-ish, but I mean, let's just look at, how the general American populace views these things. You've got a few people in rooms making decisions for the entire world, and I don't think that's a good thing. I think that they should delegate that stuff down. And if you really want to win this, if your goal was to really put Afghanistan in a box and kill all the bad guys and get rid of Osama bin Laden and move this ball forward, then we could have done that years before. And the proof is there. If you go back and read any of the CIA documents or any of the intelligence reports that were coming out that have been declassified, if you read any of that kind of stuff, you'll see it. We knew where these guys were. We knew how they operated. We knew who was the head dude and where he lived and all this stuff. But that would have ended the skirmish. And we need the skirmish to go on for a little bit longer so that we can develop the new widget or gadget over here, make a few million, and then we'll move on. So that's just my 2 cents. I sound like a conspiracy nut. I'm not Alex Jones, I promise.
No, I don't think you sound like you'd be shocked by how many people I've interviewed on this show who share very, very, very similar opinions. One guy said it. He said war is big business.
It is.
It makes a lot of people rich. It buys a lot of houses. And that was coming from a tier 1 operator who'd seen the worst. And he still said war is big business at the end of the day. It pays a lot of bills.
Dude, you have to look no further than go back to when we were going to Iraq 2, and you got Bush Cheney sitting there, and Cheney was working for Halliburton. I mean, dude, it's not smoke and mirrors anymore. They're throwing it right in your freaking face. Here it is. How many of your 4-star generals and your ex-politicians are getting out and going to work for these big defense companies at the top echelons, getting in the C-suite right off the bat? Like, that's not by accident. That's by design. It's the self-licking ice cream cone of you scratch your back or you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. And it's out there for everybody to see. It's not like they're even hiding it anymore. There it is.
And I think for me personally, one of the things that kind of ticks me off a little bit is you'll hear people say things like, the military's gone weak, or the military's so corrupt, or that, the military sucks, whatever it might be. It's like, no, it's got bad people in leadership positions. The rank and file, the sergeant on the ground in the 82nd Airborne is not going to get a job at Lockheed Martin when he retires. Yeah. He's not the one calling the shots. He's just trying to feed his family, doing his job. It's the people at the top. They're responsible. I mean, what's that saying? Shit flows downward. Yeah. I mean, it's literally, in my opinion, what it is. The leadership has allowed a lot of this stuff, I don't know if you can say corruption, but that is kind of what it is. Yeah, it's like, okay, I'll just go get $1 million a year job on a board of whatever once I retire. Or even worse, I'll go work for a foreign government and I'll teach them X, Y, and Z, and they'll pay me $2 million. Yeah. I don't even understand how that's legal, quite frankly.
I'm a consultant. Yeah. Yeah. No, I do think, and in my previous, where I was talking about just a few minutes ago, I don't want to make it sound like, everybody up, at the top echelons, and not everybody's a bad person. I'm not saying that. I do believe that we have some politicians wearing uniforms right now, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. And really, when you start blurring those lines between what your mission objective is and what your political goals are, when you start blurring that line in the middle, I think that's where you have problems. And really, this started right after World War II. It all started right after World War II, and Eisenhower and Roosevelt they all warned us against this, right? When you went from the Department of War to the Department of Defense, and they said, hey, beware of the military-industrial complex, right? We've created a monster here in World War II. We've proven that we can do this and make a shitload of money at it. And it's turned over and turned over and turned over until here we are.
I mean, I think these are all great points, and I have a good feeling that the audience is going to agree with a lot of what you're saying, without a doubt. Yeah. I do want to transition here to the next thing of when Jason and I spoke to each other. One of the things the audience could not get enough of, and I'm regretful because it was only like a 2-minute conversation, is the North Korea problem. And I know that when you sent me your history, you had spent some time in South Korea. Yeah. What years were you there?
I was in South Korea I was in there for 4 months, and it was the spring of 2010. Yeah.
So that must have been, that would have been about a year or two before Kim Jong-il died. So Kim Jong-un was not running the country yet.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jason and I had a very brief conversation, but I want to unpack a little bit more with someone with your history. because it is fascinating to me. When you assess what a war against North Korea would look like, air war, ground war, whatever it might be, what would it look like if they tried crossing the border or they started firing artilleries? How would that war unfold to you?
I don't think it would end well for them. I think that we have enough power projected in that region right now that we would be able to probably stamp it out. It would be over pretty quick, in my
And
opinion.
and for let's dig zoom in specifically on the air war, because I know that their gear is old. It's all so old Soviet stuff for the most part.
Yeah.
Do they have any hope? Could they bring down any of our advanced equipment? I mean, could they bring down an F-15? Could they bring
Oh, sure.
down?
Yeah, yeah. I
So,
mean, when you phrase it like that, yeah. I mean, there's always the golden BB theory. You throw a rock into the pond, you might hit a fish, but you also might not. I mean, it's a big pond and there's not a lot of fish. But yeah, everything that we have, and everybody wants to put like the F-22 and the F-35 on this pedestal. Every single fighter platform that we have is susceptible to threats out there. And if you're not doing the right things, and if you're not putting your aircraft in the right position or the right regimes to perform at its maximum, then you can get caught. When I run the simulators down here for some of these guys, they mess things up and they die in the simulator from third generation threats sometimes, and it's embarrassing for them, and rightly so. We shouldn't lose any assets, but could we? Absolutely, we could.
and so would that be more due to pilot error? Like what, when you say when they screw something up, how bad do things need to go for like an old MiG, like a MiG 15 or a MiG 21 to take down an advanced fifth gen fighter or fourth gen
I,
fighter?
I'd say things would have to be going very poorly. Probably. I mean, always there's human error. Guys make mistakes. You misinterpret something or you make a wrong maneuver or something like that, and you put yourself in a bad way. But we train so much that I think probably, and we're really balancing what's probable and what's possible right now. But probably, if you got to that point, somebody had a mental error, made an execution error, and put themselves in a bad position, just by accident. But even at that point, especially with our advanced, with a lot of our advanced aircraft, we have ways to get ourselves out of trouble. It's kind of like having a really good 2-iron in your club bag for when you get in the trees.
I'm not a big golfer, but I get the
Yeah, me
reference for
neither.
sure.
But I spent enough time off the fairway to know that I need that 2-iron.
So if let's assume for the sake of this hypothetical we're running through that our pilots are doing everything right and their pilots are doing everything right,
Yeah.
is how long is that air campaign in your guess, your estimation? Is that, I mean, will they have fighter jets by day 4, 5, and 6 to still get in the air, or
Yeah,
will
they're probably going to run out quickly. They just don't have they don't have the depth and the infrastructure. And again, this is my opinion. I haven't been in that theater in almost 15 years. I don't know what their current necessarily capabilities are. I will say this, that when we're training fighter pilots today, we're not really worried about North Korea. Like we don't really train to that fight. It's kind of like oh yeah, and those guys. That's kind of the way we look at that.
Well, that is actually a bit of a great segue to another topic we have here,
Mm-hmm.
that our audience could not believe the first time around. And that is the Chinese, the Russians, the
Yeah.
Iranians. When you look at those three, I think feel free to correct me if I'm wrong on this. I feel like those three are the big three threats that the U.S. is probably focused on. Is that correct? China, Russia, Iran?
Yeah, and from my perspective, and again, this is just me. I'm fairly myopic. I train fighter pilots to do fighter pilot things, and we don't train to Iran.
Really? Okay. And is
Yeah,
that
I
just
mean, because
because their
what's
gear's
their Air
so
Force
old?
look like right now?
Right. It's old F-14s,
Yeah,
isn't it, from like the
yeah, they
1970s?
don't have one. That's the answer. They don't have an Air Force. So, I mean, if we were to go into Iran, and this is again just from my lane that I'm in right now, what I think I can speak somewhat educated to, we would be going over there in some kind of strike capacity, not an air capacity. We would be
Oh,
going to hit targets on the ground, most likely.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So then We'll scratch out Iran,
Yeah.
Russia, and China. Both
Yep.
big militaries. Obviously, Russia's in a war in Ukraine
Yeah.
currently
They're not
going
as big
on.
as you think, huh?
Yeah, apparently not as
Yeah.
advanced as they wanted the
Exactly.
world to believe. What would you say the gap is between our air power and China or Russia's air power?
Um, I don't think Russia is quite there. I think China's probably closer. And I think my buddy said this when he was on the show. I think that they're not really inventing new things. They're stealing things and re-engineering them potentially. So they are lagging the fight just a little bit, but not by much. And the things that we're training to nowadays, they're fairly capable. Um, not super scary, but they're fairly capable. I think
So
really what it would come down to, it would come down to attrition in the end.
well, I'll get to that in 1 second. But when you
Okay.
say they're not scary but capable, can you explain that a little bit more?
Well, I would say that if you were to look, if you were to draw it out and say, who's the closest thing we have to a peer-to-peer enemy right now, it would probably be China. Just from an Air Force capacity. I mean, look around the world. Nobody else is really quite there. So when you look at the capabilities that we have in our Air Force, they have a lot of the same capabilities. Not exactly the same, but a lot of the same.
So when you perfect, I love the way this is rolling. So when you say not exactly the same, is there an example you can give of something we have that the Chinese could not at this time replicate?
I don't know that they have the depth of stealth technology that we do. And forgive me if I'm being very vague on this,
No,
because
that's fine.
I do still kind of operate in this world. So I have to be really, I told you in the pregame, I was going to have to measure my words
Yeah.
carefully. And I can't let all of the cats out of the bag, if you know what I mean. I think that China probably doesn't have the depth of stealth technology that we do. That's not to say that they don't have any. That's to say that they don't probably have the depth of it that we do.
So, and then this goes back to the attrition thing, which you said, which
Mm-hmm.
whenever you go online, I love going on YouTube and watching documentaries about different scenarios that might unfold. It's probably drives my girlfriend crazy, but I'm not
Yeah.
going to stop doing it. They always talk about how the great advantage that China has is if they want to fight over Taiwan or something, all their stuff is there. It's right off their coast. It's their home field. We can only fight with what we can bring to the region from the
Yeah.
United
Yeah.
States.
That's an advantage.
So, but that's what I want to know. How big of an advantage is that to China? Is that something we can overcome, or is that something that essentially you're really rolling the dice with the
Well,
numbers?
you get into so many different layers here. So, I mean, just right off the top of my head, if I were to kind of war game this out a little bit, let's say that we're thinking about most likely course of action, most dangerous course of action. Most dangerous course of action we say is they're going to send the hordes. They're going to send every plane that they have across the Taiwan Straits, and they're going to try to take us out that way. I don't know that we could get enough missiles airborne. Just with the assets that we can forward deploy, with the assets that we can get there in time, with the assets that we can have on station at the time, with the loadouts that we have, missile count is going to be a thing. It's going to have to factor into that equation a little bit. On the other hand, what if they decided to slow roll out their threats and just send a few at a time? Well, we can shoot all those guys down, but at what cost? Can we put enough fuel out there in the forward battle space? Here, I'm flying an F-15 or an F-35. I can't land on an aircraft carrier and get gas. I have to go somewhere else and get gas. That takes a lot of time that I'm not in the battle space. So you see, there's so many layers to this onion that it's not just could we beat them? Could we forward deploy enough assets? Yeah, man, you could park enough things on concrete out there, but could you fly them? I don't know. If you could fly them, could you have enough weapons on them to shoot down the other guys? I don't know. It's good. It makes for fun wargaming for sure.
Do you think that Russia getting bogged down 2+ years in Ukraine has given the Chinese maybe some second thought about if they thought invading Taiwan was going to be easy, because I think Russia thought invading Ukraine was going to be easy and this be over in a week. And now we're more than 2 years later and it's still going on.
Oh yeah, I don't know, man. That's a good question, and I think you could look at it from a couple different angles. One, maybe they're looking at Russia, going, okay, let's learn some lessons from this and how to not fight a war. On the other hand, you look at it, if you looked at it from a geopolitical standpoint, and you go, and if I'm in China right now and I'm looking at geopolitics, and I go, wait a minute, the U.S. is they're encumbered in so many areas right now. What if we went now, while their forces are kind of divided? You know what I mean? So it brings up a very interesting discussion from the Chinese perspective. And I don't know what the answer would be. I mean, obviously they haven't done anything yet, so that's a good thing. But they could be looking at this on one hand and go, man, if we were to utilize this as kind of a divide and conquer tactic, now might be our chance.
And that's a very good point that you hear people make as well.
Yeah.
And it's, you're kind of weighing the scales. Well, let's
Yeah.
hope that we don't find ourselves in a World War III, a shooting war in the South China Sea, and God knows what could happen from there.
No, I hope not, man. And from China's perspective, we talked a lot about their hardware capabilities, but we didn't talk at all about their cyberware, their software capabilities. And I'll give you this example, and I'll kind of let the listeners and the viewers kind of think about this and chew on this and form their own opinions. I was in an exercise one time, and we have squadrons in the Air Force called the aggressor squadrons. Are you familiar with these?
Nope.
Okay. They're a squadron that flies usually F-16s, maybe have some F-15's mixed in there. They're painted like bad guy jets. They fly bad guy tactics. The entire squadron is dedicated to being the enemy of the good guy squadrons. And they have cyber people in there. They have administrative people in there. They have intelligence people in there, just like any other squadron, but they're devoted to taking out the good guys. All right. So we're in this exercise, and the cyber dudes in the aggressor squadron took down our unclassified computer network for our squadron that day. They just basically unplugged it. I don't know how they did it, but we couldn't log in to our unclassified network that day. We did not fly. Because they took down our unclassified network, we didn't have the capability to go to a sticky note and put it on the board and say, you're flying that jet. For some reason, we could not get over that hurdle. Now, this was 15 years ago. So would that happen today? I can't tell you that, yes or no. So I'll let your listeners think about that for a second. What if China's biggest threat is not a hardware threat? What if it's a software threat?
I mean, that's a great point. Do we have the ability to do the same thing to them?
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
Okay.
100%. Sure. So, I mean, I think it's naive to think that we have all this awesome capabilities and all these awesome tactics that nobody knows about, and we're keeping everything close hold in like Area 51 hangars and shit, and they don't have the same things. All right. I think that's a super naive thought for us. I think you have to look at it as whatever we have, they have. What we know, they know. It's called peer-to-peer for a reason, right? And while they may not be exactly there, they're pretty damn close. All right. Close enough to make me worried that I would assume going into a fight that they know within reason what I'm probably going to do, what our capabilities are. They train to this. They know this. They've been briefed on it, just like we've been briefed on their tactics and their capabilities. We have to assume that they've been briefed on our tactics and capabilities.
No, it's a very, very, very fair point. And I think, like you said, let the audience, that cyber thing is absolutely nuts. I've never heard
that one
anyone
scares the hell out of me.
I mean, it scares the hell out of me, and I'm just only now hearing about it. There's really no other way to say it than that. It's terrifying. I do want to talk a little bit here about the F-35, because I know that you work with it now, and it's an incredible piece of technology. But before we get into we'll fuse them together. Do you remember when that F-35, what was that, like 2 years ago, went off the aircraft carrier deck into the South China Sea?
Oh, no, I don't remember that one.
So it was, I mean, the news was talking about it not nearly as much as the thing went to land, something went wrong, the pilot ejected, and the plane went into the South China Sea. And China sent these salvage ships to go find it. We sent our own, crews to go get it, and we got it back first, which is obviously great. In the event that F-35, this highly advanced stealth fighter, had been pulled up by a Chinese salvage ship, what do you think would have happened?
Well, they would have probably tried their best to reverse engineer it and find out what made the F-35 special. I
So,
mean, that's what they do. That's what they're notorious for. So
but you don't think we would have done anything to stop that ship from making it back to China?
I think we probably would have. Yeah, there would have probably been some kind of interdiction to make sure that didn't happen. I mean, those kinds of operations they go way back. The everybody from the DoD to the CIA would have been involved in that.
Well, and here's the reason I asked that question. Do you remember when we bombed the Chinese embassy in Serbia?
Yeah.
And it's never been confirmed. There's been a lot of reports that they had the wreckage of, what was it, an F-117 that had been shot down in that NATO campaign, and the Chinese allegedly, according to reports, had part of that wreckage in their embassy, and then a B-2 flew over and thought they were bombing the factory down the street.
Oh, oops, that went away. Yeah.
Yeah, oops. That's why I asked about the missing F-35,
Yeah.
because it's a eerily similar situation. But on the F-35, without getting into anything you can't get into, I'm not an expert on the F-35. I don't know anything about it other than it's a 5th-gen stealth fighter. It's an incredible piece of technology. What makes the F-35 unique compared to the F-15 or the F-16 or maybe in the F-22? Are there differences between, I mean, I know there's differences, but can you explain what puts the F-35 in the world it's in?
Yeah, well, to just draw a line of demarcation here, F-15s, F-16s, A-10s, all those are all 4th-gen fighters. And while they're very capable, when you move into 5th-gen fighters, you're in a whole nother world. You're in advanced avionics, advanced radar stuff. Obviously, there's the stealth component. There's so much difference between those two that it's not even a fair discussion. While those 4th-gen fighters are still very capable and they still bring a lot to the battlefield, they are not 5th-gen fighters. They just can't do the same thing. I mean, think about this, man. The F-15C models, the F-15, the F-15 flew its first sortie in 74. Or, I mean, yeah, it's been that long. That's 50 years ago, bro. So now we're talking about airplanes who are flying their first sorties 10 years ago, 15 years ago, whatever it was. There is a vast difference in it. The way that the aircraft is built, the way that the aircraft operates, it's just completely different. When you add the avionics suite, that's an upgrade in and of itself. And the Strike Eagle is very robust. The F-15E is very robust when it comes to avionics. But when you go into the 5th-gen world, take that and multiply it by a factor, and then you add stealth technology on top of that, it's formidable.
What are some mission sets that the F-35 is kind of its bread and butter?
I think it was probably, now I don't know this for sure. I have some theories and I tell some jokes around it when I'm giving lectures and stuff. But I think that the F-35's, I think its biggest strength is getting in close into the middle of a battle space and sharing that information with other people. That's really what I think it's going to be best at if it comes down to it.
And that's kind of similar to the new B-21
the
Raider, because I know that when Boeing, Jason and I talked about this too, when Boeing brought that plane out for the first time, one of the things that was very hyped about it was that it can fly over a battle space. It sucks up all this information, and then it shoots that information out to whoever needs it. The B-21, according to, the people who designed it, can detect submarines at levels that a plane of that magnitude you wouldn't think would be able to. That's the kind of technology. I'm just some random dude. Like, my brain literally explodes at the idea. What would be something the F-35 would not be good at? You would not want to put an F-35 for this type of mission.
The Taiwan Straits scenario would probably not be its. He would not be my go-to platform for that scenario.
And why is that?
Well, and I use that. I can't really get too deep into it. I just say this, and Jason hit on this. You know, in order to preserve the stealth technology of these aircraft, they have to carry their weapons inside, which means that they're limited, right? So the F-35 only has 4 weapon stations internally. That's not a lot of firepower. You know, when I can take a Strike Eagle out and I've got 8 per jet, you know, I'm doubling the amount. You know, when you go pound for pound in gas, I'm doubling the amount of firepower that I can bring to the fight in a fighter that's really designed to be out before their threats are even a threat, really, before their capabilities are even a threat to me, is the design. If we get into a close in turning fight, I already told you the Strike Eagle is not great at that. And spoiler alert, the F-35 is really not either. So the standoff capabilities of the 2 airplanes, I would rather take a Strike Eagle to that fight because I can take more firepower.
So does the same logic apply then to the F-22, that the F-22 wouldn't be really great in the Taiwanese Straits as well?
F-22 has a lot different capabilities. F-22 was built as an air-to-air fighter, and so it has a lot more internal weapons carry capability. It is also mechanized for that fight, so that's a different discussion.
Gotcha. Okay, we'll
Yeah,
see that. Learn something
yeah,
new every day.
yeah. That's a total different discussion, and we train to a lot of tactics that amplify the strengths and the weaknesses of all of these aircraft put together. So it's not just like we're not just going to send 2 Strike Eagles down the lane to defend against the Chinese hordes that are coming across the line, right? There's going to be a robust force package that's put together, and everybody has different capabilities, and everybody's sharing information, and it's going to be a very difficult fight for them to win.
When you take a look in the future, like you're talking about how the first F-15 flew more than 50 or right around 50 years ago. When you take a look 10, 15, 20 years in the future, what do you think air combat and air platforms is going to look like? Is there a possibility we get something where we have full-blown fighter jets, but they're operated like a drone, but they're fighter jets, capable weapons?
Are you familiar with Annie Jacobson?
Annie Jacobs, the author? Yeah.
Yeah. Read some of her books, and then you could probably answer your own question. I love the movie Stealth. I get this question all the time, and it's an old movie. It's got Jessica Biel in a tight flight suit. It's pretty cool. But basically, they've got AI fighters with a pilot in one aircraft, and then he has 3 or 4 AI bots fighters that he's controlling, and that he's going out to fight with, his little wingman, his digital wingman, if you will. I don't think that's too far off the horizon, probably. I think with the advances that we're making in technology, that's going to be a capability coming up. I'd say probably within a decade or so, maybe. The next step would be fully autonomous fighter platforms that are out there, which is a unique that presents some unique challenges when you start talking about rules of engagement and decision making, and do you have a man in the loop always? There's a lot of, I think, aside from the technology, there's a lot of issues with that just from a ideological standpoint that we're going to have to break through.
Can you, sorry, I'm confused by what you're saying. When you say a fully autonomous, what do you mean? A pilot who's just on his own, making his own?
No, an airplane that does everything itself.
So there's pilot in it.
That's right. Yeah. So somebody in a mission planning cell puts some stuff on a little geek stick and sticks it in the airplane, and that airplane takes off and goes and does a mission. I don't think we're very far away from that.
But like you said, there could be, ethical, or what if the code goes wrong and the plane just opens up? I mean, that could
they did a test out at I think it was out at Edwards not too long ago, where they had an AI. It was an AI F-16, I believe, fighting a manned F-16, and he won 10 out of 10 fights. The AI, but I mean, think about it, man. Obviously, airplanes are limited by how much G they can pull, right? Structurally, they're limited by how much G they can pull, or you'll literally rip the wings off of them. I've seen airplanes with bent frames from pulling too many Gs. But there's also the pilot. The warm goo in the middle at 98.6 degrees is a limiting factor in some of this stuff. You read all the time about jets that plant themselves into the ground because the pilot G-locked. He lost consciousness because all the blood rushed out of his brain. He was pulling too many G's. It happens all the time, right? Well, if you don't have a pilot in the cockpit, now you're not limited to that. Now you can build a platform that can pull more G or outperform what would normally be a restriction just by having a dude in the jet. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I mean, what's to say that we couldn't build a 10G fighter or a 12G fighter? And when you bring a 12G fighter to the merge against an 8G fighter, he's going to win every time. Add stealth technology to that to where the dude can't even see him before he's rolled in on his 6 and guns him down. It's no contest, man. So the cool thing, and the reason that I brought up Annie Jacobson is there was a point to that, right? And I encourage your listeners to go, if you can't stand reading her books that get down into the weeds of this stuff, go watch YouTube videos. Go listen to her talk about DARPA. Go listen to her talk about Area 51. Go listen to her talk about some of these programs that she's uncovered through the Freedom of Information Act. And the reason I bring that up is she's talking about things that were happening in the 60s that nobody had any idea was going on until just a few years ago. So what's going on right now that we won't know about for 50 years? Think about it in those terms. And then suddenly you have a different perspective when you start thinking about these things.
Well, and that is a great segue to a question I wanted to ask. And I feel like this is a fun one. UFOs or unknown, unknown flying objects. I mean, it seems like every day we get more and more information or videos, stories, whatever it could be. What is your theories, if you have any? Is that classified technology that we don't know about? Is it little green guys? Like, what do you think it is?
You know what, man? Let your imagination run with that one, because I think probably, and again, probable, possible, good, fun discussion. But typically, when people hear UFO, they think little green men and flying saucers. But that's not at all what it means. It just means that we don't know what the fuck this thing is, right? Like, it's unidentified and it's flying and it's an object. We don't know what it is. And that happened, gosh, man, look all the way back to the 50s and 60s when they were experimenting so many things over the Nevada desert and the New Mexico desert. And people were looking at it going, what the heck is that, man? You know, you just don't know. And so the idea that we're not still doing some of that stuff is naive on the American public's part. Like, there are things being tested out there that you don't know what it is, out of hangars that you don't know that exist, right? They're hidden from the public for a reason. And maybe 20 years from now, we'll know what those things are. But there was an old, I remember hearing this years and years ago, and it goes something like this. Whenever you see a jet, like say that you remember the F-35 being rolled out by Lockheed Martin, and they go, look at this bright, shiny new jet that we've got, and the F-35, and it's awesome. They did the thing with the F-22. It's great. Whatever they're rolling out, its replacement is already being built in a hangar somewhere. That was kind of a rule of thumb that I was given years and years ago. And so think about that for a second. And as capable and phenomenal as the F-22 and F-35 are, what are their replacements going to be? And how capable is that? And where's it being built? You know?
That's a outstanding way to look at it. Let me throw something out to you. And I'm an open-minded guy. I don't think I believe in aliens. I don't really know. But have you ever seen the famous Tic Tac video that was filmed by the fighter jet pilots that took off from I think it was the USS Nimitz? They were out doing an exercise, and it's like the one the government always brings up. Is that the one
that goes from like 0 to 60,000 feet or something like that? I haven't seen it, but I've heard a lot about it. Yeah.
So everyone talks about that story, but the one thing that nobody talks about in the dialogue is the admiral that was running that fleet had known about that thing for 2 weeks before that video was filmed. He told the fighter jets that went up, they wanted to go get a look at this thing finally, and he sent them all up unarmed. Now, stop and think about that for a second. If they thought this thing had any malicious intent whatsoever, was he going to send multiple fighter jets up without any weapons?
Seriously.
The fact they went up without weapons tells me they didn't want them shooting at this thing.
Yeah.
Which means it was almost certainly United States technology that they were testing.
Yeah.
Can this thing outrun a fighter jet? Which it did.
Yeah.
So like I feel like there's logical, rational
Yeah.
explanations to a lot of this, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. It's a fun topic though. I enjoy it.
Well, it is, man, and that's why I like reading the things like Annie Jacobson, and there are a few more out there who kind of uncover some of these things for us. You know, they draw back the curtains on some of these technologies that have been around. Like we look at look at the SR-71, and we've known about that thing for years, and everybody knows its capabilities and what it can and can't do, and blah blah blah. But what they don't know a lot of is about Oxcart and how that was the precursor to it. That was the CIA's version before the SR-71, the DoD version, kind of got commissioned, and all of the cool things that Oxcart did, and nobody knew about it. Not a single person. I mean, the thing was built. It was built in hangars, like just in regular neighborhoods, and trucked on trains over to the Nevada desert. I mean, and nobody knew about this. Like 5 people knew about this darn thing. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. Earlier in the interview, you had talked about kind of division, people being divided. What do you think motivates that?
You're talking about just socially, like
Yeah, I mean,
specifically.
I think it's fair to say that, you know, the perception is that American society is incredibly fractured and that we all hate each other. And I'm not saying that's accurate. I'm saying the perception of that is the way it is. Why
Whose
do you,
perception of that? Whose perception?
if I turn on if I get on Twitter, like
Yep.
Twitter's a great example. I have Twitter. I read it for work. It's very useful if you know why you're on there, getting what you're doing. You get on Twitter, you got people talking about how we're on the verge of a civil war, and they say that stuff, and people believe it, and they think that their neighbors are going to be like their enemies sooner than later. And I know you were talking about division, and we're not as divided as we're led to believe. But why do you think some people are incentivized to kind of sow division among the public?
Well, it's good politics. I mean, that's
Correct.
the short answer. If you want a short answer, now we can talk about it for hours if you want to. But the short answer is it's good politics to keep us all divided. The haves and the have-nots have been a thing, since humans came around, since we turned into an agricultural society. Really, it's been about the have and the have-not. Somebody's got to be in charge, and that person's going to get more than the people who are not in charge, and blah 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 blah. And you see this. I mean, it's written in the Bible. If you want to go down that road, it's historically documented that there is always going to be a division. There is no such thing as everybody wins. There's no such thing as that. So for the people out there who are kind of rooting for this everybody gets a trophy mentality, it's false. It doesn't exist. It's not going to exist. You may get the same piece as your neighbor, but guess what? There's somebody somewhere that's getting a bigger piece than you. It
Right.
doesn't exist. So I think that, just when you look at that division across them, again, this is just my opinion, man, and I'm not speaking for anybody else except myself right now, but I think that when you look across it, I don't see it day to day in society around here where I live. I see harmony. I see people who generally get along with each other. I mean, yeah, there's the asshole neighbor down the street, but everybody's got that, right? Every neighborhood's going to have an asshole in it that drives too fast or makes too much noise on a Friday night or whatever it is. That doesn't mean that you hate the guy. It just means that maybe you need to go have a talk with him, right? I don't see big racial division where I live. And I live in a place that has it's a pretty good melting pot of a lot of different races. And I just don't see that. I see people generally get along with each other. People generally respect each other. I think that as far as the division goes, it's fueled by propaganda and it's fueled by politics. That's my opinion. I think that the longer they can keep us divided and throwing rocks at each other, we're not focused on the real problem, which is them, and we start throwing rocks at them.
When how many kids do you have? Did you say you
3.
got three? Three.
Yeah.
So I liked what you just said, kind of about the participation trophy thing. I agree 100%. I don't have
Yep.
kids though, so I only got to look out, for me, and I don't believe
Yeah.
in that whatsoever. What's it like to raise children, kind of in this era now of your feelings are all that matter? Here's your participation trophy. Everyone's
Yeah.
a superstar. You can do no wrong.
Well,
I see that all the time. It's crazy.
no, dude, I can tell you from with 100% certainty and clarity that I did not raise my kids that way. you could call every one of them. You call every one of my boys. My oldest is 28. My youngest is about to turn 20. You can call every one of them and ask them, how many times did your dad let you win at a basketball game? The answer is zero. Like, if you're going to win, you have to beat me. And my 19-year-old beat me the other night. He was so proud of himself. But I didn't let them win. Like, you have to figure this shit out, man. You have to know what it's like to lose and let that annoy you a little bit. And that makes you better, man. It makes you want to work harder and be better. And the proof is in the pudding now that my boys are grown, and my boys are ahead of their peers because their peers were coddled. Some of them were. And I will follow my sword for this one, man. If you are the kind of parent that let your kid get away with this everybody gets a trophy mentality, that kid is going to lose when he gets to adulthood. He is going to lose 100% of the time to the person that was not raised that way. My boys knows what it feels like to fail, and they don't like that feeling, which makes them work very hard. The other kid doesn't know what it feels like to lose because he got a trophy when he didn't do jack shit on the football team, right? There's a big difference in mentality when they get to adulthood. And it may look great on your trophy shelf when you're 8 and 10 years old, but guess what? When they get to be 25, it does not matter. And the proof is going to come out. For these parents who have raised their kids that way, it's going to come out when those kids reach adulthood.
You are preaching to the converted. I agree 10,000%. In my old job, before I work where I work now, I was in charge of hiring and managing a small group of 4 to 6 people.
Oh, so yeah.
And it was shocking how entitled. The longer I stayed there,
Yeah.
so then, by the time I'm 26, 27, 28, now there's 20, 21-year-olds coming in. And the level of entitlement, it seemed every year got worse and worse and worse.
Yeah,
I'll give you a great example. You work hard. The way I was raised and what I truly believe is you agree to a X amount of money. I'm going to earn X amount of money at this job. I'm going to work really hard for a period of time, 18 months, whatever it might be. And then I'm going to ask for a raise. And then in 18 months, I'm going to keep working even harder, get better, and I'll ask for another raise. I've had employees who their mindset is pay me more today for no reason, and I'll work harder in the future. But if you don't pay me more today, I'm not going to work harder, period. And I was like, that's not how this works.
Yeah,
the quarterback on the NFL team doesn't get paid before he wins. He gets paid after he proves that he can win. It's like, what world are you living in right now?
Well, not to plug my own stuff, so to speak, but over my shoulder, I've got my book called Work Hard, Don't Suck. And I wrote that for my kids. And the whole gist of the entire book is these are strategies and tactics to help you win at life. And it starts with working hard and trying to suck less than you did yesterday. And if you don't have that mentality as an adult, then you're going to lose. Because there's somebody else out there who is. And one of my favorite quotes, man, is Tim Tebow. And this isn't necessarily word for word, but to paraphrase him, he says, somewhere out there, there's a guy that's practicing and I'm not. And when we meet, he's going to win. And I mean, that's just reality, man. And, you can say preaching to the converted, or you can say, I love your mentality, but it's a fact. It's substantiated. It's quantifiable. You can put numbers to it. These people who have not ever been challenged in their life, when they get to adulthood and they're up next to a guy who has, that person who's been challenged is going to beat them every single time without fail.
Let me ask you this, because you got 3 sons, and I feel like personally, it seems like masculinity, or this idea that it should be celebrated to be a protector. It should be celebrated to be a person who looks out for weaker people who can't look out for themselves. That all seems to kind of be going to the wayside. Now if you intervene in a situation, you could be accused of being sexist, racist, pin whatever word you want on it. There's the train incident in New York where that guy stopped that homeless guy. Now he's in huge trouble. When you raised your 3 sons, was there an expectation that if you see someone who needs help, you better drop what you're doing and help them?
I raised my boys that way. I did. And really we had a saying in our house, man, and it was just be a good dude. And then you have to get into the discussion of what a good dude is. That's why I wrote this book. And kind of it lays out, I got 61 topics in there, and it's all really brings you back to how to be a good, well-rounded young man in today's society. And one of those things is, dude, you got to help people out, man. If you see a little old lady on the side of the road with a flat tire, stop and help her change it, right? Because here's what's going to happen. I believe in karma, and that shit's going to come back to you in some way. And when I was going down range for 6 to 9 months at a time, I needed to know that my wife was going to be taken care of. So when I'm out on the trail and there's somebody with a twisted ankle, yeah, I'm going to carry you back to the parking lot, or I'm going to splint your ankle for you and help you back. Because when I go on a deployment and my washing machine goes out, I want to know that karma's going to take care of me and my wife is going to be handled. And we've all been in situations like that, right? Everybody's needed a hand up at some point in their life. Everybody has, right? It's normal, man. So when I get a chance to give back, 100%. I give back. We started a podcast to give back. I wrote the books to give back, because I'm sitting here at 48 years old and I've had all this experience and fun, and I've accumulated all this awareness and all of these anecdotes, and I can draw all these lines of parallel and metaphors, but what good does it do me if I don't share it with other people? Right. And that's kind of the way that I've taught my kids. That's kind of the way that I've raised my kids, is if you have the opportunity to help somebody, help them out, man. That's called leadership. It doesn't have you don't have to have the gavel or the hat to be a leader. You don't have to be out front with the badge and the flag to be a leader. Help people out. That's leadership, man.
Right. I mean, absolutely. And that little impact could turn that person's entire day around, their entire week around.
Dude, I
and
got so many stories about that. So many.
Well,
I wrote the other book over here is called No New Lessons. And in the middle of that book is exactly what you're talking about. Don't discount the idea that one person can completely change your life. Just one random chance encounter with a complete stranger can change your vector forever. If you're open-minded to things and you're fearless enough to take some opportunity, to take some chances, then yeah, man, it's so awesome that you said that.
Give me the best example you have of that, one you'd like to share.
Oh gosh. Well, I would tell you the whole story about the book, but I want your listeners to go buy it.
Right.
I was told one time, I was told a friend of mine, I was getting ready to write a book, and I was getting some thoughts together, and I called a guy, and he gave me some good advice, but he put me in touch with another dude. And meeting that guy, just that one phone call that I made, who put me in touch with another guy, that guy completely changed my vector. He gave me a lot of advice. He put me in touch with other people. He really helped me get some things off the ground that I'd been trying to get going for a long time. I just didn't know how. And by reaching out to one person and making one phone call, completely changed everything. So it doesn't have, I mean, it's not like this big formal event, you know, and I think sometimes people get lost in this idea of, well, I got to go to college and I got to do this and then I got to do that. And it goes back to what I said in the very beginning, man. There's no such thing as the way. Look for opportunities, make phone calls, network with other people, take advice from dudes, try new things, and you never know what's going to happen.
I couldn't agree with you more. My girlfriend's a little more advanced. I wish she was here. Well, I mean, she's going to watch this after the fact. You and her could go on all day about this, because she loves to just, kind of any experience. I'll try anything new. I'll network with anyone. I'm like that too, but not quite to that degree. But I agree with you. Sometimes I'll get asked to talk to people in my industry that are younger, coming out of college, and I pretty much say yes to anything you think you might even remotely like. Go to that event, get coffee with that person, get a beer with that person after work, get lunch with them, go to that random lecture series and work really hard. If you're an intern, be the first intern here. If you're an intern, be the intern who is always available to help. And all those people have done just fine. And then the people who kind of stayed by themselves and didn't want to do that, not so much. Hold on. I think I just lost your audio.
How about now?
I got you back.
Oh, I accidentally hit the mute button on my mic. My bad. I'm an idiot.
No worries at all.
No, dude, I 100% agree with you, man. And I think that, let's go back to raising kids and the mentality that you put into them starting at a very early age. Maybe potentially a military child has a little bit more of an advantage on this because we moved around so much and they just got very comfortable meeting new people and having new faces around the house and new conversations and new friends to hang out with. They got very comfortable doing that. But if you can encourage your kids to be confident to have conversations with strangers when those kids are 25, going into a new work environment, it's going to be a non-factor. It's going to be so simple for them, and it's those little things, I think, that you start when the kids are young. It's those little things that compound over time. Unfortunately, you don't really know until you release them into the wild. And they graduate high school and you kind of kick them out into the real world and you kind of sit back and you watch and you see those little things. Oh yeah, okay, I can see when he went up to this guy, he shook his hand, firm handshake, good eye contact, said yes or no sir, those kinds of things.
The one thing that I always find comical is that I feel, look, I'm certainly no expert with women, not even a little bit, not going to sit here and pretend to be, but I remember when I was in college, dating apps didn't exist. And now I know they're super
Yeah.
popular with people. If I wanted a young woman's attention, I had to walk up to her. I had to say something, I had to break the ice, whatever it might be. One of the things, and I seriously mean this, I've written about it many times. I think one of the biggest detriments we have for young people, 25 and younger, you watch these people communicate in person,
Yeah.
and you can tell they're used to doing this.
It's hard. Yeah.
And it's like, you realize that that's not how people communicate, right? Like
Right.
you gotta communicate face to face, be confident. Yep. You might get shot down by 70% of them. That's okay. That means 30% left the door open. Like that to me, and I could go on all day about this. That to me, you talk about confidence going into a new workplace. It's the confidence issue goes way past that for some of these people because all they know is the computer screen, and that does not translate to real life.
Well, look at you and me, man. We've been sitting here for almost 2 hours, sitting here just talking and maintaining eye contact the entire time and having good conversation back and forth. How many 20-year-olds could do that right now?
Not many.
And it's difficult. It's difficult for us as parents, I think, a lot of times to balance that because, I mean, yeah, let's face it, man, the world's changing and the digital age is upon us and we're just going to have to deal with that. But dude, can you take a 20-year-old and have him sit in a room full of people and tell a really good story? It's difficult, man. I tried really hard to open communication was always a big thing in our house. And I think for good reason. I wanted my kids comfortable talking about any subject. I wanted them any chance they got. I wanted them to stand up in the middle of the living room and talk to us and give us their ideas on things because down the road, it's going to be really important for them. That's a critical skill for them to learn of how to formulate your thoughts and put it out there in a coherent way that people can understand. And I laugh at my youngest boy who just finished his freshman year in school. I think I said that already, but I was asking him, how'd you meet your girlfriend? He goes, oh, we met in the most Gen Z way ever. Our hallway leader had us put her Snapchat handles on a sticky note on our doorways. And we just went up and down the hallway Snapchatting each other. And she responded. So for a week, they had a Snapchat conversation. And then they met for the first time at the chow hall. And they sat there for 30 minutes and didn't speak. I'm like, yep, that checks. I can totally see that.
That does sound about right. What's one thing that I haven't asked you so far that you wish I would?
God, man, we covered a lot. I don't know. That's a really good question, and I'm usually the one that asks that question, so it's tough for me to be on the other end. We have been talking for a long time. We have covered a lot of ground. I love talking about the mindset of high performance, and I know the types of guys that you interview on this show. And I think that across that demographic, there's something that separates these people from other people. And it's that ability to get to that level of performance. And I'm not necessarily saying that you have to be able to bench press 250 and run a 5-minute mile and have a bunch of tattoos and wear body armor, right? It's a mindset thing. It has nothing to do with that. So you were talking earlier, you started down the road of masculinity and And I think that there's a perception potentially out there on what is masculinity. And if you subscribe to social media, you're going to get a story on what they think masculinity is. And a lot of times it's how many burpees you can do, and can you do this workout, and can you shoot guns and all that kind of stuff. When really masculinity may be, are you a provider for your family? Could you protect them if the bad guys came in? Are you a leader for your wife and kids? Are you a good neighbor? Those kind of intangible things, those kind of things that maybe you can't quantify necessarily by how many burpees you can do. So I think the discussion on masculinity is a really good one. It's a really deep one that could probably take another hour to really dig down into.
I'm so glad you brought up kind of the social media part of that. I laugh kind of hard. You'll see some of these influencers, these masculinity influencers. Some of them are even veterans, and they really lean into that. And they're covered in ink from the neck down, and every photo is them in like full kit.
Sure.
And they're saying like the most bizarre, cringe things.
Yeah.
And then you look at some of these dudes who are actual like former Delta Force operators, and they're like 5'8". They dress completely normal. You get on their Instagram, you would never know.
They're wearing khakis and a t-shirt. Yeah.
They're wearing khakis and a tucked in polo. And all I can think about that is, I know which one of those two guys is going through the doorway in an event of a crisis. And it's not the guy whose entire persona is crafted for Instagram. That fries me. And the actual tier 1 guys, I've talked about this on podcasts with them. They see that and they laugh their asses off at it.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
well, now, to be fair, all right, there are some, and you can go on Instagram and find these guys. There are some of those previous, former tier 1 guys out there who are giving these dudes a bad name because they're using that to put themselves on a pedestal for their own gain. And I'm not going to begrudge anyone for using the position that you've been put in or the talents that you've been given for your own personal gain. That's fine. Use that. But understand, if you're a male looking for a role model, understand that for what it is. And maybe that's not reality. Maybe, the vast majority of people are just normal dudes who have a lot of confidence in themselves. And that tier 1 guy who's wearing khakis and a tucked in shirt, he exudes confidence, not because of how many burpees he can do, but because of the way he carries himself.
Right. I agree 110%. Yeah. Well, we are running up on our time limit here. I got one last one. It's a fun one.
Sure.
And you got to get in a dogfight. A dogfight's coming.
Yeah.
What plane are you getting in for that dogfight?
An F-22 Raptor.
And why?
Because it's designed to win that fight. It's designed for super maneuverability.
There you go.
It's really no contest. I mean, anybody who knows anything about jet aircraft will probably answer in the same way. If you gave me life or death, nuts are on the chopping block, and I got to choose one, I'm going to choose a Raptor.
And then real quick, I know that this has been awesome. We have covered so much in this interview. Can you tell the audience, I know you got three books, right? Can you tell them where they can find you on Amazon and anywhere else you might be?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you can just Google my name, Paul Roscoe White, and it'll pop up with either my website or my podcast website. The podcast website is www.b1change1.com, B and the number 1 change and the number 1.com. And then my website is paulroscoewhite.com. And on the website, it'll link you to Amazon. You can go into Amazon and type my name in, and it'll bring up the books that I've written on there too. Work Hard, Don't Suck was my latest one. It came out last September. And that's really a guide I wrote it for young men. That's not to discount young ladies. I'm a boy dad, and I wrote it to my boys. But I've had a lot of girl dads that have came up to me and go, dude, I want my girls to read this so they know what to look for in a man, which I think is a really unique perspective. So Work Hard, Don't Suck is out there. No New Lessons is a kind of an adventure story. It's about a pretty epic hike that I took up in Alaska where I didn't really learn anything new. Almost died a few times. It's pretty fun. I wrote it in a little bit of a more lighthearted, comical way, but there's some good lessons to take away from that one. And then I was part of a compilation book called I Love America with a guy out in Philly. He picked 13 veterans to each write a chapter, And mine is I'm chapter 1 in that book, and it's all about opportunities and how to recognize them and take advantage of opportunities.
I love it. Well, Paul, thank you
Yep.
very much for being here. I feel like we're gonna have to run this back maybe in
Sure,
12
man.
months because we have so much more that I'm
Yeah,
sure we
let's
could go
dig
into.
in.
You've been an awesome guest, and I'll catch you next time around. We'll definitely be doing this again.
All right. Thanks, David. Thanks for having me. And to your listeners, man, I appreciate you. I hope you got something out of it. If you want to learn more about any of this, hit me up on socials, paulroscoewhite.com.